Welcome to But Jesus Drank Wine.
And other stories that kept us stuck. I'm Mead.
And I'm Christy.
And in this podcast, we'll explore the stories that kept us, well, stuck, wanting to drink and not wanting to drink all at the same time.
Join us as we show you that freedom from alcohol does not have to mean a life sentence of misery and missing out,
but actually means living an authentic life full of peace, joy, and purpose.
Hello, my beautiful friends. Happy Monday. Welcome back to the podcast. It's actually just me today. Mead's taking a day off, but I'm so excited to talk to my friend, Jon Seidl. Jon and I are in a Christian recovery authors group, which is so amazing because we've connected with such cool people in there. He's worked in the news business as well as the popular nonprofit I Am Second. He's now the founder and president of the Veritas Network, which is focused on helping individuals, companies, and nonprofits understand and tell their stories. He's the author of Finding Rest, a survivor's guide to navigating the valleys of anxiety, faith, and life, as well as the forthcoming book, which we're so excited about, Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic, a candid conversation on drinking, addiction, and how to break free. He also runs the popular website, the Veritas Daily. He's also responsible for getting me on Substack. If you're a Substacker or if you're not a Substacker, and we're going to link Jon's Substack below, go subscribe to the Veritas Daily. It's amazing. He sends out daily nuggets, which I don't know how you do that. You write every single day. Hope and inspiration. It's so good. So, hi, Jon. Welcome. Yay.
Hello, friend. And I love that I can say that, right? I mean, it's God has done so much in my life over the last 18 months, 2 years. And one of them, like you said, is truly bringing just a new group of people into my life. You know, I think you probably, I know, well, not probably, I know you talk about this a lot, that I think some people get nervous when they stop drinking or slow down drinking or whatever. You know, a big concern is the friend group, right?
Yeah.
And I can tell you that God has been faithful in my life. And not that I ditched old friends, right? In fact, I still have all the same friends, but He's brought new ones into my life to even more celebrate, you know, the route I've taken. And you are one of those people.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I love that you brought that up. When we had in our community, we're coaching through my book, The 40-Day Fast right now. And one of the gals brought that up about that being a fear is the friend group change and the shift. And I said pretty much exactly what you just said of he's brought new and really incredible people into my life that I didn't see coming. And also the way that he's done it, the pace that he's done it, you know, like he didn't rip all my friends out from under me and change everybody in a day. It's been a process, but it's like so for me, which is amazing, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's so funny is like you and I mean, I don't know how many Zooms we've done. It's not like we've done like 25, right?
Yeah.
And yet, you know, we were talking before this, we're like, we should probably just hit record because it just feels like we're old friends already.
Yeah. All the good stuff always happens like before you record.
Yeah,
And I'm just like, no, stop talking. Let's just
right. Exactly.
But I'm actually excited to hear your story because I haven't heard it in full. Like I've obviously read so much of what you've written and I'm so excited about your new book coming out. But can you take us back to the beginning? Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, here we go. And I think I want to preface this by saying, and I know that you say this a lot and I'm so on board with it, is, well, my story will have a rock bottom moment. You don't have to have a rock bottom moment to change your relationship to alcohol. And so I shouldn't say I always give that caveat, but I think it's an important caveat to give because there are plenty of people that I know that I'm like, I really think you should change your relationship to alcohol. And they're waiting for the rock bottom moment. And I'm like, I wish I wouldn't have waited for that, as you will see.
Yeah.
So I think really it's interesting. My relationship with alcohol was forged at a young age, but not like you might think. I grew up in Wisconsin, which is literally the drunkest state in the union. And I grew like it's got the drunkest counties, the drunkest city, it's the drunkest state, right? And meaning that alcohol is like the air you breathe. The first argument my wife and I ever had was when we were planning our wedding. And she came from a very staunch traditional Southern Baptist family, and they didn't want any alcohol at the wedding. And I said, we were getting married down in Texas where my wife is from. And I said, I literally cannot ask my family to travel from Wisconsin down here and not provide alcohol. And
Mhm,
my wife is like,
mhm.
"What are you talking about?" And
Yeah.
my father-in-law, to his credit, who he was in marriage ministry at the time, he had a pastor friend that lived in Green Bay, and he called up his pastor friend and say, "What is my son-in-law talking about? Like, is this true?" And
Mhm,
the pastor friend, who was from the South but was living in Green Bay, said, my father-in-law's name was Brian. He said, it is Brian. Said, "Brian, not having alcohol at a wedding is like not having a bride. That's
mhm,
how important it is here."
mhm.
And so I tell you all that to say, like, that's the culture I grew up in. And yet I wasn't like, I mean, I first got drunk around 12 or 13. That
Wait,
was my
wait, wait, did you have alcohol at the wedding?
we had wine. And
Okay, okay,
in the program of the wedding, it had to say that it was provided by my family.
okay,
So,
okay.
yeah.
Compromise.
Um,
Alright.
so even though I got drunk for the first time around 12 or 13, it wasn't like, for some people that's the switch and it just continues there. For me, it wasn't. It was that one time I did that, and then I actually have diagnosed generalized anxiety disorder and OCD. And so actually for me, a source of one of my thought ruminations became like, or one of my worries, one of my what ifs is, if I get drunk, what will happen? Right. So I
Yeah.
actually stayed away. Like, the good part of my anxiety kept me away from alcohol for the most part. I mean, I would have drinks with family every once in a while, maybe at Christmas, but like maybe it was a beer, maybe it was a glass of wine. So, but it was never like a thing until really college. But again, not underage. I really didn't start drinking or drinking heavily until I was 21. And I made up for some lost time when I turned 21, but not like in a party way.
Mhm.
It's really when my I'm an alone drinker. I'm a I can't shut my mind off. Again, the anxiety and OCD, and I need so I d- the easy way to do that is to drink.
Yep,
The easy way to get
yep.
relief, right? And
Mhm,
that started a pattern of that, right? Where my body knew that. And yet I would say, so my relationship with alcohol was kind of always on again, off again. I'd go through periods of heavy drinking, then quit. I'd quit for a month, I'd quit for 2 months. I think one time I even quit for 3 months.
mhm.
And I use that though well, see, I don't have a problem.
Yep, I knew you were gonna say that.
Yep. You know,
Yep,
even I didn't get the shakes, you
right.
know, but it was just always cyclical, right? And so I say that to kind of set the scene. And so in 2021, well, I should say around 2016, 2017, I I was diagnosed with anxiety and OCD, and I started writing about that.
Mhm,
And I was soon contacted. I was at the nonprofit I Am Second. I was the editor in chief, so I was in charge of all their writing and written content. I was contacted by someone from a publishing house who said, "Hey, have you ever thought about writing a book on this?" And long story short, she put me in touch with an agent. I put together a proposal. I got a book deal to write on faith and mental health through the eyes of my story.
mhm,
And really kind of calling the church to, like, let's erase the stigma. Medication is okay, but also, like, the premise of the book is, it's right here. It's finding rest, and like you had mentioned, it's let's treat this. I call it the three-legged stool: brain, body, and spirit, right?
mhm,
And so treat it physically, but also spiritually. It is a physical problem, but it's also a spiritual problem. But it's not only a spiritual problem, right? The
mhm.
problem, the world wants to say it's all physical. Historically, the church has wanted to say it's all spiritual. So just pray more, have more faith, and get over it, right?
Yeah.
And so that was the premise of the book. It did really well. Life was great.
Mhm,
And I had a friend who had published some books, and we had a phone call right before the book came out in 2021. So it's funny. I signed the book contract January 2020. The world shuts down March 2020, and even more so, the world needs a book on faith and mental health. So right before the book comes out in September of 2021, I have a friend, and he says, "Hey, you need to be really careful." And I said, "Okay, be careful about what?" He said, I in my experience, you're going to publish the book and you're going to get through the press and things are going to, everything's going to feel great. He said, but there comes like a moment where you don't know what to do with yourself. He said,
Mhm.
for 2 years or a year and a half or however long you've been working on the book, once it's published, and you stop doing the podcast and you stop doing the whatever, he's like, you kind of feel lost.
Yeah.
And the best way I can describe it is kind of like, you know, we've all heard those stories of the professional athlete who retires, right? And then they just like don't know what to do with themselves.
Mhm.
And or even people, even normal, Joe Blow and Susie Q, your in-laws or whoever, like they
Yeah.
retire and they're like, retirement isn't all I thought it was going to be because I like
Right.
don't know what to do, right?
Yeah.
And I said, I'm the faith and mental health guy. I'm good,
Yeah.
right? I didn't quite say it like that, but I think that was in the back of my mind. I'm like, thanks, I'll file that under good to know, but I think I'll be good.
Yeah.
I wasn't good.
Mhm.
Pretty soon after the book came out, and you've published a book. I just, even though the book did well is relative, right?
Mhm.
And so I think we
Mhm.
all have ideas in our mind of what our projects should do.
Yeah.
Whether you're an author, whether you're, I don't know, an insurance agent, you all have ideas in your head about what success looks like.
Yeah.
And so,
Expectation. Totally. Yeah.
right. And so again, even though the book was like number 64 on all of Amazon,
That's
you know,
amazing. Yeah.
it was number 1 new release in several categories, a bestseller in several categories, top 100 book. I was like, man, but it didn't make a bestseller list, you
Mhm.
know? And, I got press, but, I didn't get on the Today Show.
Mhm.
Just like things that you realize, oh, I kind of had this hope for it.
Yeah.
And so I started to feel a little bit of that disappointment. And, sure enough, after the first, month or so, things die down. And I started feeling really disappointed.
Mhm.
And so that kind of started this slow mental decline. On top of that, I have a consulting business like you had mentioned, and where I take my background in the news and in digital media and nonprofit work and kind of help people tell stories and navigate the digital landscape. I had a really big client that basically had hired me as a functional CMO.
Mhm.
And what that meant was they were really my only client. I mean, I had some smaller ones, but really my attention was all there, which also meant I was getting paid a lot of money and it was great.
Mhm.
And around the first second week of December, something happened between them and their CEO. They parted ways. And basically they said, hey, we're tearing this down and starting over. And because you're
Mhm.
a contractor, like, sorry, but your contract's done at the end of the month. And I'm like, what? Like try to find new clients at the end of the year,
Mhm.
December, January. Like it's just not happening.
Yep.
And that was really my main income. And so I took that hit spring of 2022. I did have another client. I built, kind of ramped them up, but within a few months they were like, hey, it was like the recession. I joke, it was the recession that wasn't a recession, that was a recession that wasn't a recession, like whatever. But all I know is that client is like, hey, we're contracting. And so sorry, but we have to bring this in-house because it's cheaper.
Mhm.
So I lost that client.
Mhm.
Then that spring, my son, we found out he had a tumor in his leg.
Oh my god.
He all of a sudden he just starts limping. I mean, he's like 4 and he's like limping around and we're like, what is going on? We take him in, they find this tumor and it ended up being benign and miraculously literally like went away. But that wasn't like within a week's time,
Yeah.
that took like
Yeah.
that was a
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
And then my best friend at the time, he lost his job. And there's something called empathetic depression that you can
Yeah.
develop. And we were
Yeah.
really close. And
Yeah.
so all of these things, you take all of these things in chorus, and what started as a little slide after I published my book, by the spring, early summer of 2023, I am a full-blown alcoholic. Like,
Mhm.
all, yeah, I'm the Christian mental health guy, but I got hit with stuff that I just a cascading effect of things I just never saw coming. And it wasn't like I set out to drink them away, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's important too. Like, by the way, if you're listening to this and you're like, wow, I think I'm, Jon, like I'm right where you are. Like, I'm not saying you set out to become that way. Like, I
Mhm.
really don't know anyone who says, I'm going to become an alcoholic. Like, I
Yeah.
want to get the gold medal,
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah.
But what started as, you know what, I could really use a drink, which, by the way, I'm going to say, I think that's one of the most destructive phrases in the world. And I hear so many people say it. It's not like I get mad, right? But I hear my family members say, "Oh, I just need
Yeah.
a drink." And what that is that's embedded in our minds and in our culture, that the answer,
Mhm.
it's the quick response to any stress is, I just need a drink. Now,
Yeah.
maybe a lot of people, they can just have one and that's fine. But I think there's a lot of people like me who we hear, "Oh, I just need a drink." And I'm like, "Yeah." And I start with, "Yeah, I just need a drink." And what I found is what started as I just need a drink, the little bit of relief that it gave me turned into, if some is good, more is better.
Mhm.
And if 5 o'clock is fine, if I don't have any work at 3 o'clock, well,
Yeah.
that's fine. And if 3 o'clock is okay, then 1 o'clock is okay. And then 10 o'clock, like it just keeps going. And so it really came to a head. I should say it started coming to a head beginning of May. My wife and I went on this spiritual retreat. I have a mentor who, he kind of has a group of us. He's an older guy, not an old guy. Because if he's listening to this, Steve, you are not old. You are older than me. And he there's a group of like three of us that he's been mentoring, and he said, like, "What do you guys need?" And we were all like, "We're burned out." Right. And so I was feeling I was feeling spiritually heavy, physically heavy. And he's like, "Okay." And so he had some friends, and this friend had a ranch in Georgia, and he's like, "Hey, I have arranged for all of us to go down there. Everything's paid for. Just pay for your flights, provide food and everything." And I'm like, "Yes, this is awesome." Right. I'm like, just chill out, sit in a hammock. And the day before we leave, we get this email in our inbox, and it's like this spiritual assessment. And I'm like, "What the hell is this?" I'm like, "This is not relaxing." You know what I mean? And then it became really clear pretty quickly that this wasn't like, you know, mimosas in the morning type relaxation. This was, we're going to do some work.
Mhm.
And so we got down there. Ironically enough, I found the alcohol when we got down there. It's a Christian thing, which is part of my big message. Doesn't matter. I get drunk the first night on some really good bourbon. I wake up the next day. We're doing some spiritual work. I'm doing it hungover. And I'm like, I have a problem. I literally can't come to a spiritual retreat and not get drunk.
Mhm.
Like, that's an issue, right?
Mhm.
I told myself that first night, I'm not going to get drunk. My wife says, "Don't get drunk." I'm not going to get drunk. I stumble back to the bunkhouse, literally with a bottle of champagne in my hand. And I'm like, "Hmm." And so the next day we kind of do some of the spiritual stuff, and I just break down. I literally, I'll never forget. I'm like, they release us to kind of do some journaling and stuff on our own. I'm leaning against a white picket fence watching these horses, and I'm just like bawling. And a buddy comes up to me, and he's bawling, right? And I'm like, I look at him, and I thought, I think I'm an alcoholic. And so that day, I actually go to my wife and I tell her. And I think this is confusing for some people. She goes, I don't know if you're an alcoholic. And I've talked to her about that since then because I took that as, oh, yeah. Well, here I am admitting it. And my
Mhm.
wife, the person closest to me, who's been telling me not to get drunk, says, I don't know. Well, what I came to understand is we were in a group setting, and she she had been so burned by me in the past where I'd come to her to talk about my drinking, and where she had brought it up and I got so defensive that she was scared that if she affirmed it, that the rest of the weekend would be ruined. And so what she was trying to do is she was just trying to not sweep it under the rug, but say, like, basically, let's talk about this more when we get home.
Yeah.
And then let's unpack that. Right. And but I took that as, well, I guess maybe I just need a little break, you know?
Yeah. Mhm.
So we get home. It's coming up on like our 14th or 15th. I think it was 15th at the time. Let me just see here. 14 year wedding anniversary 2 weeks later. And we had planned to go on a trip to Miami. We kind of have this bucket list of like places we'd like to go. It's like Charleston and Miami, and we just, whenever we get a chance, we were going to cross them off the list. And so we had planned been planning this trip for a while to Miami. And so I didn't drink for like that 2 weeks before our anniversary trip. And then I told myself, I said, "Self, you've been so good.
Mhm.
You haven't drank for 2 weeks. You don't have a problem.
Yeah.
Now you can reward yourself." Right?
Mhm.
You're going on vacation. There's no worries. You're going to be, it's just, you're walking from the hotel to the beach. Right? And so we go on the trip, and I reward myself. Not crazily. I'm just like, in fact, I wouldn't drink during the day. I'd only drink at night, but I'd have 3, 4 and feel good. And yeah. And there was one night, a few nights into the trip, where my wife had actually gotten in a car accident a couple weeks earlier, and she was dealing with some effects from that. And she said, I'd really just like to have a night in. Like I'm sore still. I'm not feeling well. Some stuff seems to be going on. Can we just have a night in? And I said, sure. And she goes, by the way, like you don't have to, like, I'm just going to lay down and go to bed early or do whatever in the hotel room. She's like, you can do whatever you want. And I'm like, well, I'll just go down to the hotel bar. There was a basketball game on. And I'm like, I'll order some appetizers. I'll order a few drinks. I'll watch the basketball game. And she looks at me and she goes, okay, but don't get drunk. And that was kind of a refrain that had really, especially in the last previous year and a half, had really started to become, okay, but don't get drunk. Nope, not gonna get drunk. I'm good. Okay. Go down to the hotel bar. I mean, within an hour, I'm drunk. Like, the bartender's making these like gin martinis, and I'm just like, and he warned me, he goes, they're strong. And I'm like, great, all the better. And within an hour, like I said, I'm tipsy. By the end of the basketball game, I pay my bill, which was way more than I thought it was going to be, which happens when you're at a Miami hotel bar, I guess.
Mhm. Been there.
Yeah, so then there's probably a little shame there too, to
Yeah.
be honest with you. But I'm like, I can't go back to the hotel room like this. There's no, like, if I come back to the hotel room like this, I'm gonna be in trouble. And so I'm like, all right, I need to sober up a little bit, a lot of bit. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna walk down to literally the hotel was on South Beach. So it was like right across the street. And I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go walk down on the beach and just try to get some fresh air and walk this off. Stumble out of there, walk down to the ocean, and I I mean, I'm feeling it. One thing you need to know about me is whether I'm drinking beer, whether I'm drinking gin martinis, whether I'm drinking Coke Zeros, my grandmother passed down to me the smallest bladder that you can imagine. And so I go to the bathroom a lot. And so I get down to the beach. I just gone to the bathroom at the at the hotel bar. But by the time I get down to the beach, I have to go to the bathroom again. And I'm like, and surprisingly or not surprisingly, there's a lot of people on the beach on South Beach at night, more than you'd think. And they're like, I mean, they're smoking weed, they're doing whatever. And so there's like no privacy. So I'm like, what am I gonna do? I have to pee. I don't want to walk all the way back to the hotel bar. Drunk John has a great idea. Drunk John decides to wade into the ocean with all of his clothes on and go to the bathroom. Because why not?
Yep.
And so I literally walk into the ocean with all my clothes on and I go to the bathroom and it starts coming out of both ends. And I finish and I look up and I can kind of see the South Beach, area. And I'm just like, what have I become? Like,
Mhm.
really? Really?
Mhm.
You promised your wife you weren't going to get drunk. And now not only are you drunk, but you are in the ocean going to the bathroom with your clothes on, you know,
Mhm.
chin deep in water.
Mhm.
Um, and so I'm like, this needs to change. And so I get out, I wait till I'm at least halfway dry. I go up to the room. I wake up the next morning. It's like, I shouldn't say morning. It's by the time I wake up, it's like noon. I have a text on my phone that my wife's already down at the beach. So I go down to join her.
Did you wake her up when you came back that night?
I didn't think I did. I'd find
Okay.
out later that I did. Like
Yep.
she knew.
Yep.
So I get down to the beach that next day and pretty early on, she goes, "So, did you get drunk last night?" And just so easily, so quickly. No, no, I didn't get drunk. You sure? Yeah, yeah, no, no, no. I mean, I had a few, I was probably a little tipsy or a little buzzed, but I wasn't drunk. Okay, okay. Two other times throughout the day, she asked me, "Hey, you you really didn't get drunk last night?" No, no, no. And I call it my Peter day, like my Peter moment, where I
Mhm. Yep.
deny her 3 times.
Yep.
And after the 3rd time, it just is really, really eating at me. Like, the ease, the quickness with which I lied to her,
Yeah.
and I'm like, "I gotta tell her the truth." And so, kind of our rhythm during the vacation was we'd get up, we'd go down to the beach. We really wouldn't eat like we'd be like, let's save our calories for dinner, right? Like we're gonna save money and calories during the day, and then we're gonna treat ourselves to like a nice dinner. So that was kind of our rhythm. And so that night we go to this like really interesting, I don't know, I think it was like Venezuelan cuisine, like really great. We sit down, and I'm just kind of picking at the food and probably still a little hungover, honestly. And finally, I look at her and I say, "Hey, babe, like, I need to be honest with you." I said, "I got drunk last night." And pretty immediately, she breaks down. She goes to the bathroom. She comes back and, she's like, you just don't know what that does to a woman. Like the
Mhm.
fact that you lied to me multiple times, how easy it was. And she goes, the funny thing is I knew you got drunk, right? You think you didn't wake me up, but you did.
Yeah.
And, and so like, I knew it, and you just lied, and you kept lying. So pretty quickly, we paid the bill, and we actually ended up walking down to the beach, to, like, the same area because we just, like it was one of those it's where you, like, walk out and, like, neither of you know where to go or what to do, so you just kinda keep walking, and you
Mhm.
follow each other a little bit, and so, like, we ended up at the beach, and we're kinda sitting there, and I'm apologizing profusely, and, I mean, we're both crying, and I'm saying like, "Yeah, I know I have a problem. I know I have a problem." And like, I'm like, "I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna stop." And she looks at me and she goes, Jon, I don't care if you stop drinking. Like that, I don't want you to commit to me to stop drinking. Like that's not what I'm looking for. She's like, what I want you to commit to doing is getting to the bottom of why you're drinking.
Mhm.
She said, because if you don't have have any other drink in your life, she goes, it's going to be something else. It's just going
Yeah.
to be something else. And I'm like, can we just go back to the part where I don't drink anymore? Like that would be easier, you know? And so I said, she knew that I had some traumatic experiences growing up, some things that had happened to me, which is an interesting conversation I want to have after I'm done with the story. But so I had been looking into seeing a therapist, a licensed counselor who was a Christian, who would integrate faith into her counseling and therapy. And it was a form of therapy called EMDR therapy. If you're not familiar with that, it's the audience, if you're not familiar with that, it's a type of therapy that really gets to, basically the theory and the science behind it is when we have traumatic experiences growing up, especially they get locked in our amygdala, like to the back part of the brain. And so when things happen that trigger those, in a sense, unconscious memories, we deal with them in unhealthy ways. And so EMDR therapy, in a sense, forces us to work through them with the prefrontal cortex,
Mhm.
the reasoned part of our brain, and especially our adult prefrontal cortex, to basically take back the power and to re-experience them is maybe not the best word, but reprocess them in a healthy way. So I've been looking into this therapy, and so I literally pull up on my phone and write an email to the therapist. I fill out like her form, and I hit submit, and I show it to my wife, and I say, there, I took the first step. And yet we still like cried, right? Like it was like, okay. And so we get back to the Dallas area where we live, and I start a year of weekly intense trauma therapy, EMDR, IFS, internal family systems therapy, to really get to the root of my drinking. It was hard. It was really hard, but it was really good.
Mhm.
And I didn't do 12-step program. I read the big book. I thought that was helpful. But really my commitment was to therapy, and in a sense that was my weekly meeting, right?
Yeah.
Like that was my accountability. I had one relapse about a month after. So 5 I have two dates tattooed on my arm. One is 5/27/23 and one is 7/9/23. 5/27/23 is the date I committed to sobriety. 7/9/23 is the date of my last drink. And I actually think I love that they're different.
Mhm.
Well, I shouldn't say love, right? But I think it's more real life, right? Is
Mhm.
that you can have a commitment to sobriety, and sometimes there is an interregnum, is
Mhm.
the old word, a period of lull between, if you will, that commitment to sobriety and the date of your last drink.
Totally.
And so that's where I'm at, is, that was 18 months ago was my last drink. And probably I had probably been in the intensive therapy for about 7 months. And I say that it was the first year of my sobriety was probably the most rapid and
Mhm.
rabid spiritual growth of my life.
I totally
Um,
relate to that. Yeah.
I mean, it's really just like when you feel like you've lost everything, which, by the way, doesn't necessarily have to mean that, like, I'm strung out and I don't have a job, right? But for me, that was really the last thing I was holding on to. I had come clean about looking at porn to my wife, years ago, but I still had this one thing, right?
Mhm.
And so in a sense, like, you come to the end of yourself and you're like,
Mhm.
I am so bare, like, I am
Mhm.
so naked.
Mhm.
And and so when all you have to hold on to is Jesus, when you've been so stripped away, right, of dignity in a good sense, right?
Yeah.
Like you feel like, all right, there's the things that I was admitting to my therapist. I talked about these traumatic experiences growing up. Like, one of them was I was sexually assaulted by my sister. And so, you know, but I had never really talked through that, talked
Mhm.
about it. And so when you're sitting there telling someone this and you're going through the details and you're like, reprocessing this stuff in a healthy way, you just feel like, man, there is not much of me left.
Yeah.
And yet that's where Jesus really showed up in my life. And so probably 6, 7 months into that, I'm praying one morning and like, I'm getting up at like 4:30 to spend time with the Lord. And I don't, by the way, like, that's not, I say that, like, I'm not saying that to say how holy I am. I'm saying that to say, like, how holy crap I am. And what I mean by
Mhm.
that is, like, that's not me. I mean, I've always been a
Mhm.
morning person, but, like, getting up to pray, like, no bueno, like, that's not who I am. So the fact that I'm doing that is not a credit to me, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And 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 so the Lord starts really impressing on my heart, "This is your next book." And I'm like hell it is. No way. And I think there was a lot of fear there, and the fear was, I'm the Christian mental health guy. I
Yep.
can't admit that then my mental health took such a crap dive that I became an alcoholic. Like, that's not how it works, right? Like,
Mhm.
fine, like, Lord, I'll give you everything. Like, I've given you everything, but can you at least keep me from having to admit that to the world? And
Mhm.
I fought
Mhm.
with him so hard. And I said, "Lord, I have so much to lose." I said, I went back and looked at my first book contract, and the morality clause in that contract was very loose. And I'm like, they can take my book out of print. My wife and I were part of a Christian health share ministry. Every year, sign something that says, I'm not going to get drunk. Like, all these things, I'm like, Lord, I can't. Like, there's literally a chance we'll lose our health insurance. I was still writing for I Am Second at the time. I'm like, I'm if I admit this, am I going to lose that contract, that writing contract?
Mhm.
I was in
Mhm.
talks with a big Christian nonprofit to do an entire video series for their, like, 3,500 global staff on mental health. I'm like, they're not going to What they're not gonna go through with that with me, you know?
Mhm.
And the Lord literally brought me to a story in the Bible. I mean, there are literally times where I'm getting up at 4 and I'm just, like, opening the Bible. Like, this is how crazy this stuff is. I'm
Mhm.
opening the Bible and just, like, starting to read where it is. Like, okay, I opened to Psalms 32, here we go, I open to Matthew 12, here we go. And I really think I'm trying to remember, I had heard this phrase once, and I'm like, "I need to look up where this is." And so I end up in First Chronicles, and I'm in First Chronicles 21, and there's this story of David. And so pig-headed, dumb idiot David does this thing where he takes a census of all of the fighting men. So, like, he's like, I wanna know how many guys I have that can wield a sword." And
Mhm.
God says, "Don't do it." He's like, "Nah, I'm gonna do it anyways. Don't get drunk. I'm gonna do it anyways." Right? And so he does it because it's a pride thing, right? It's like, I wanna know what my power is, how much might
Mhm.
I can wield, How many people, if I say jump, they're going to say how high? And so he does it. And the word that the scripture says is that the Lord sends a pestilence, right, on the land. And so David is like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I made a mistake. Please forgive me. What do I have to do? And so this angel appears to David and says, David, if you need to go and find a man named Ornan. And Ornan has this land. And there you need to offer a sacrifice. And if you do that, I will lift the pestilence from the land. And it was like, all right, I'm all in. So he's like, goes running. He goes and finds this guy, Ornan. It's like he's like outside the city. And Ornan sees David, the king of Israel, approaching. And he's like, holy crap, the king is here. He goes and he throws himself down before David and he says, my king, I see you coming. Pretty positive I know why you're here. Here's the land, to make an altar. And here's like my best animals for the sacrifice. Like, they're yours. And David looks at him and says this. And it's a phrase that's changed my life. He says, I will not sacrifice that which costs me nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And David pays him an exorbitant amount for the land and the animals, and he makes the sacrifice, and the Lord lifts the pestilence. And what the Lord was saying to me is, John, don't sacrifice that which costs you nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Said, if I'm calling you to write this book, and if there's no if it may not cost you anything, it's not a sacrifice.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, maybe you lose your health insurance. Maybe this happens. Maybe that happens. And guess what? Like, that's what I'm calling you to do. And I was like, hit my heart.
Imagine stepping into a vibrant, warm community where faith, friendship, and freedom from alcohol all come together. That's exactly what you'll experience in the But Jesus Drank Wine community.
Each week, our members gather for connection calls that feel like a breath of fresh air, a time to share, grow, and support one another.
With an encouraging leadership team, a dedicated prayer request space, and connection opportunities in every time zone, you don't have to walk this journey alone.
Plus, we bring you masterclasses with expert guests, optional book clubs and Bible studies, and so much more.
And for those ready to go even deeper, we offer a small group coaching space called The Missing Piece. With weekly recorded coaching calls, it's a supportive place for women committed to breaking free from alcohol.
We're here to hold space for sober and sober-curious women who love Jesus or are eager to reconnect with him. Wherever you are on your path, you'll feel seen, supported, and strengthened here.
As one member described, quote, the BJDW community is unique because there's a connection between faith and freedom from alcohol that I haven't been able to find in any other online space or through my church.
Ready to join the sisterhood? Head over to butjesusdrankwine.com/community or click the link in the show notes to learn more. We can't wait to meet you.
And yet, that's not where the story ends. So that's 1 Chronicles 21. It's the end of 1 Chronicles 21. And if you go to 1 Chronicles 22, and I think a lot of people, I know I miss this, a lot of people miss this, because 1 Chronicles 22 starts, you think that's the end of this whole sacrifice story. And if you go to 22, it's a whole new heading, right? So even the heading is like, well, this is a new story. Well, the first verse of 1 Chronicles 22, okay, is a continuation by one verse of 1 Chronicles 21, and it says this. And this became the site of the temple. And that hit me even harder, because I'm like, then it became, what will God do with my costly sacrifice?
Yeah.
What will he build with it?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, all right, I get it. You can stop hitting me over the head. I get it. And so I say, all right, I'm going to write the book. I outline it. And then I hold back. And I say, but I'm going to self-publish it, right? A little less risky. I control it. There's no contracts I have to sign. Maybe I relapse. I don't know. And then it sits there for a month and I don't do anything with it. And one morning the Lord says, guess what? You're going to have to go with a traditional publisher. I'm like, why? And he said, because you need the accountability. He said, you will not write this book if you have to write it for yourself, you're not going to write it. And I said, well, Lord, I fired my agent last month. I don't even have an agent. There's no way. I can't even write this. And he goes, that guy on Facebook that you're not really friends with, but you've been Facebook friends with, that's an agent. He's like, reach out to him. And I'm like, that guy's David Green from Hobby Lobby's agent. He's not going to take me. And the Lord says, reach out to him anyways. And so I reach out to him and we have a conversation and he's like, yeah, I think this is a great book idea. Let me start shopping it around. Okay. And I'm like, wow, he starts shopping around. Okay. 6 publishers come back and say they're interested. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. What? And long story short, I get a book deal and I write the book, and that book will come out October 7th, 2025. And it is called, like you said earlier, Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic. And the first part is, I say it's part memoir, part guide. The first part is the much larger story of what I just told. Not just that, there's that rock bottom moment and stuff, but it goes into a lot more detail. And then, I go back into explaining, the trauma that I experienced. There's a whole chapter dedicated to, how do you as a Christian? I think that's one of the big premises of the book is that the church in general, the Big C church, Christians love stories of salvation. They love the story of the person who is, down and out and destitute, the druggie, that then finds Jesus and then gets clean and life is great. The church has a really hard time with stories of sanctification.
Mm-hmm.
The Christian who loves Jesus and follows Jesus and still falls into what I call the quote unquote big sins, the adultery, the alcoholism, the drugs, the whatever. And we as a church don't know what to do with those people.
Yep.
And the irony is that's the exact people that Jesus still came for those people. I came for the sick, not the healthy, right?
Yeah.
What a lot of people think is when they become, when they quote unquote say the sinner's prayer, then they become healthy. And it's really just, no, you're still a sick person. You just now know who you're
beginning.
now you know who your physician is, right?
Yeah.
Like there's no change in your sickness. Sin is still there. It's still with you, right? And so the first part is, talking about how did I as a Christian, who by the way was on part-time church staff, who was working for people like Kirk Cameron and I Am Second and all this stuff, like how do I fall into it, right? And going into depth there, talking about what is sanctification, this this really high church word. What does that look like? What does that mean? And then the second part is what I call the 4 steps. The 4 steps I took to break free. And by the way, I tell people, like, some people listening to this are 12-step people, which is great. Like I said, I didn't do 12 steps. I had my therapist, if you will, as my sponsor, I guess. But the 4 steps are not, if you want to do 12 steps, great. Those are foundational for you. The 4 steps I call are bedrock. They're what you drill your foundation into. And the 4 steps are not things that I set out to do. They are things that as I looked back that the Lord led me to do. And not new and novel things. I'm not saying I'm the first person to ever come up with these, right? But the 4 steps I took were abiding in Christ, right? When I talk about getting up at 4:30 in the morning, now let me be very clear. That does not mean I'm calling everyone to get up at 4:30.
I said the exact same thing in my book too. I was like, you do not have to get up at 5.
Yes, right. Like maybe for you, it's staying up. what I'm talking about is spending time with Jesus. For me, that's what that looks like. What does that look like for you? Maybe it's a why. I don't know. But it's abiding in Christ. The second thing is finding your true identity, not your general identity as a child of God. I'm talking about your true identity. What has the Lord uniquely gifted you to do, and what gives you life in pursuing that? Because I think so many times we're not pursuing what we've been called to pursue, and then no wonder we're down in the dumps, or we're trying to numb or medicate, right? It's like, when you're doing something that is not giving you life, yes, you're more apt to want to numb that away. The third thing is radical vulnerability, not regular vulnerability. And so I think, love Brene Brown. She's done a lot when it comes to vulnerability, but I think the unfortunate aspect of her popularity is that people, they've kind of become inoculated to it. And the example that I use is that, we, from a man's perspective, I've sat in so many men's groups where people, every guy goes around the circle and it's like, what are you struggling with? Well, I'm struggling with a little bit of lust. Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll be praying for that for you, brother. And meanwhile, that guy's got a Pornhub account and he's watching it every day, right? But he was vulnerable, right? He said he's struggling with lust, and he knows it, and we know it's deeper, right? But he quote unquote admitted it, and so we don't dig and we're fine, right? Whereas if that guy was radically vulnerable and said, guys, I'm watching it 3 times a day. I can't stop thinking about it. It's affecting my marriage. It's affecting my parenting. Like all this stuff. Like we would rally around him and we would do drastic things. We would take drastic measures. Like that's what Jesus is talking about, by the way. If pluck it out, right? He's saying, take the drastic measures you need. Be radically vulnerable about it. Take the drastic measures. Talk about where you're at, right? Hey guys, I pray for me. I find a little bit of a stronger pull towards alcohol in this season. Meanwhile, I'm getting drunk every night, right? Well, if I were honest and said I'm getting drunk every night, well, guess what? The actions you take to help someone who's radically vulnerable about getting drunk every night is very different than the actions you take. I'm feeling just a little pull towards drinking. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then the final step is obedience, and it's doing what the Lord tells you to do. I mean, and I say that it's twofold. It's what he's telling us to do in the scriptures in the Bible. And then, by the way, when you're abiding with him, what he's telling you to do as a result of that abiding time, right? I can't tell you how many stupid and crazy emails I sent. And more than, I used to say half of them. I'm now up that. It's more than half of them weren't for the reason of why I was sending the email or making the phone call or making the ask. It was literally teaching me to be obedient. So that this past month, when the Lord says, give up your full-time job, which, by the way, he just kind of took away from me because he knew I wouldn't do it willingly. It's like, we ran out of clients. No matter what I could do, I wasn't getting any more clients. He's like, go to seminary. And I'm like, that's stupid. And he's like, go to seminary. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to seminary, right? I'm now a full-time student in seminary because I'm being obedient. That's what God told me to do. And so those 4 steps radically changed when I say radically, Christy, like there are people, you talked about the Veritas Daily, my daily writings. Like there are people back home, back in Wisconsin, and family members and stuff that read that and they're like, who are you? Like, who is this guy? And
I have friends back in LA.
Great question.
Exactly the same. Yep. Totally relate to that.
Yep. So that's where I'm at. That's the book, Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic, part memoir, part guide. That's the story in a sense that led to the book. That's probably actually, I'm going to be honest with you. The But Jesus Drank Wine podcast got the most full version, I think, up to this point that I've ever told. And so that's where I'm at. Jon, the Christian alcoholic, and I've never been prouder to say it.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, I think, and this, and no matter what where you are on the spectrum or whatnot, and I talk about that, by the way, that alcohol use disorder is a spectrum now. Even though I use the term alcoholic in my book, I spend a whole chapter 2 explaining, well, why it's not really just alcoholism. It's alcohol use disorder now. but
Mhm.
Confessions of a Person with Alcohol Use Disorder is not a Christian book. So
Yeah.
so
Same
I
with
use
Love Life
alcohol.
Alcohol Free, not really the
Yeah,
same. That's like
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So I, did Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic, but I spent a whole chapter explaining alcoholism, alcohol use disorder. And really what I come down to and what I say is it is anything that is misordered in your life is disordered,
Mhm. Yep.
right?
Yeah.
It
Ooh, I
is
love that. Say it again.
anything in your life that is misordered is disordered.
Yeah, it's good.
And so that can be alcohol. That was alcohol for me. It can be TV. It can be shopping. It can
Mhm.
be your kids,
Mhm.
right? It
Mhm.
can be your spouse.
Mhm.
It can be your mother, right? Like
Yeah.
if you anything in your life that is misordered is disordered. And that's really the definition of any disorder. If you think
Yeah.
about it,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
anything that occupies an undue place in your life that becomes your focus, that becomes what you're about. Listen, I interviewed someone for the book who's a mom that was never having alcohol cravings, was never getting drunk, but she had to have her 1 to 2 glasses of wine a night.
Yep.
Teacher of the year.
Yep.
And she found herself one day on like a Saturday or something with an energy drink that she had poured out and she had put wine in it and brought her daughter to gymnastics. Was not buzzed, was not drunk. And she goes, "What am I doing?"
Yeah.
Like like again, it's not even just about getting drunk or feeling buzzed. She's like, "When I find my comfort in just being able to drink."
Yeah.
She's like, "That's a problem." Right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
the message of the book, even though it's called Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic, is not just for people who would say, you know, maybe go through withdrawal, which by the way, I said, so many times that I stopped drinking and I didn't go through. I'm like, I don't have the shakes. Well, guess what happened when I stopped drinking the last time? I didn't have the shakes, but had the worst night sweats of my life. I look it up and I'm like, oh, this is a symptom of withdrawal.
Mhm. Mhm.
Oh, so the guy who kept saying I never have withdrawal symptoms,
Yeah.
they're just I never had the withdrawal symptoms that I thought that maybe Hollywood or whoever had told me are withdrawal symptoms, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then I start my sleep is awful. I'm waking up and like I'm literally having to change my shorts and my shirt in the middle of the night because they're soaked. Oh, that's withdrawal, John.
Mm.
But anyways, the message is like, you know, you don't have to be like that to
Mhm.
say, I'm going to change my relationship to alcohol, right?
Mhm.
And so if it's misordered, it's disordered, and that's like I said, one of the messages of the book. The other one is Christians love stories of salvation, but struggle with stories of sanctification. And I think more Christians are struggling with this than want to admit.
Yeah, I
You
agree.
know, I think I held on to it for so long because I said, I'm the Christian mental health guy. I can't admit this.
Right.
If I
Right.
admit this, how much shame, how much whatever is there going to be? How much condemnation? I shouldn't be struggling with this. I have the Holy Spirit living inside of me, right? Well, guess what? Paul struggled with stuff and he still had the Holy Spirit. It's just
Right.
like we need to get over this. Our theology is so wrong. And so it's one of the reasons I'm going back to seminary, right? Because
Yeah.
I want to be able to have, I guess, the foundation of study that when I'm talking about this, I'm saying, look, no, I've studied this, right?
Yeah.
Like our
Yeah.
theology is bad. It's wrong here. Just because you have the Holy Spirit does not mean you don't sin. That's
Right.
never been the gospel. You will still sin. That's the
Mhm.
gospel.
Mhm.
So sorry,
Mhm.
I get fired up about that, but
I love
so
it.
that's my story.
I love it. I love it. Oh my gosh. Well, I feel like we could just talk forever and I have to wrap us because I have to host a community call because so
Of
we're
course.
definitely going to have to like have you back for a part 2 cuz I want to like dive into all the four what do you call them the four steps, not the four pillars. The four steps like further and oh my gosh, I want to talk about sanctification. I want to talk about I want to talk about all of it. So you're going to have to come back.
Can't wait.
The book is out in October. That we
October
said.
7th.
So let's have you on again, like around when it launches, so we can get into like all this stuff under the hood. But I'm so glad that you came and like told your story. And I mean, I've told you this offline. Like, I talk to so many women who know that their husbands are struggling, but have no idea where to point them, and they need a Christian and a man, or they want a resource. And so this is going to like bless so many people. And I also think it's really helpful also for women to hear a man's perspective,
Mm,
obviously, because again, so many of my clients, so many gals in our community struggle with this, where they're trying to let go of alcohol and they feel like they would like their husband to, but it's really hard to do unless you want to, as we both know. And
yeah.
so, as you might know, we wrap all of our episodes with a tiny Tina, it's a tiny new action. And so, since our listenership is mainly women, what would you say to the woman whose husband she thinks potentially is struggling with this? What would you say to her? How would you encourage her?
My wife, I've asked her a lot because that's been a hard thing. She's had to go back to counseling for this, by the way. I said, "Babe, like, you never set me down and gave me an ultimatum." And she said, "No." She goes, "I just didn't think that would work with you."
Mhm.
And she was right. She said, "I literally just kept banging down heaven's door." And that took a
I love
while,
that.
right? But I think the transformation that I've gone through is way more genuine than if she
Yeah.
would have sat me down and said, "Give me the ultimatum." And so it's not meant to be trite, but keep praying, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's my Tina, and then maybe give him the book.
Yeah. Give him the book when it comes out in October. In the meantime, go subscribe to John's Substack. And yeah, thank you. I really appreciate chatting with you. That was awesome. So good. So
Thanks,
good.
Christy.
Whatever is misordered is disordered. I love that. That is so good. I'm going to use it. It's so true. And it doesn't have to be about alcohol. It can be anything, as you said.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, friend.
Thank you so much for joining us again this week. You can find all of our episodes at butjesusdrinkwine.com, and be sure to follow us over on Instagram, Love Life Sober, and I'm Not Sober, I'm Free.
To learn more about what we do, you can visit our websites, meethollandshirley.com and lovelifesober.com.
Take a screenshot of this podcast and share it with a friend or two.
And don't forget to subscribe to our pod so you don't have to worry about missing a single episode. And if you love what we're doing, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify.
This helps more women who are feeling stuck and alone in the overdrinking cycle find hope and encouragement.
Thanks, ladies. We so appreciate you, and we'll see you next Monday.